The queen is so beautiful. The words slipped out under his breath before Daniel Valen even realized he'd spoken them, carried away by the low hum of the chamber's gravity engines and the hypnotic glow of the orbiting giant below. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the ambient murmur of 100 alien voices collapsed into a suffocating silence so complete it felt engineered. Daniel blinked, still half-focused on the distant throne at the center of the court, where the queen had been standing moments ago, radiant, distant, untouchable. Except she wasn't there anymore. A cold, precise sensation crept up his spine. He didn't turn immediately. Humans had instincts, and right now every single one of his was screaming that turning around would confirm something catastrophic. "You are addressing the sovereign?" A voice hissed from his left. Daniel glanced sideways. The speaker was one of the Telari delegates, tall, slender, with elongated ears that tapered like polished ivory blades and translucent skin faintly lit by bioluminescent veins. The glow pulsed erratically now, betraying agitation. The Telari didn't blink, but if they did, Daniel was fairly certain this one would have been doing it rapidly. "I know," Daniel whispered quickly, raising both hands slightly as if surrendering to invisible authority. No, I was just thinking out loud. Human thing, very common, not important." The Telari's lips parted just enough to reveal a second row of inner teeth. There is no, not important, in the presence of her radiance. That wasn't comforting. Daniel swallowed and finally forced himself to turn. And there she was. Closer than any record, any briefing, any carefully curated diplomatic footage had ever shown her. Close enough that he could see the subtle gradation in her skin, like starlight diffused through living crystal, and the faint, slow pulse beneath it, as though her body carried its own constellation. Her eyes, larger than human proportion but perfectly symmetrical, held a depth that felt less like looking at a person, and more like staring into something ancient and aware. She was not supposed to be this close to anyone. Protocol dictated distance, layers of ceremony, controlled approach vectors. Entire species had been denied proximity privileges, and yet she stood just behind him, silent, composed, listening. Daniel's brain, highly trained in absolutely nothing useful for this moment, chose panic mixed with politeness. "Hello," he said. Somewhere behind him, a sharp intake of breath echoed across the chamber, except it wasn't one breath. It was dozens, perhaps hundreds. Different species, different anatomies, all arriving at the same collective realization. The human had just greeted the queen like a neighbor in an elevator. The queen tilted her head slightly. The motion was small, almost imperceptible, but it triggered something immediate in the room. Several delegates lowered their gazes. One of the insectoid representatives actually folded inward, limbs retracting defensively. Even the hovering diplomatic constructs dimmed their observation lights. Daniel noticed none of that. He was too busy trying to figure out if he had just ended humanity's chances of being taken seriously for the next few centuries. "I apologize if I said something inappropriate," he added, voice tightening. I didn't realize you were right there." Her gaze remained fixed on him, not cold, not angry, something else. Something that made his chest feel uncomfortably exposed. "You believed yourself unobserved," she said. Her voice didn't echo, didn't amplify. It simply arrived, clear and direct, as though the air itself had decided to cooperate with her. "Yes," Daniel admitted. "That was the assumption, yeah." A faint ripple moved through the gathered assembly. Not quite laughter, not quite horror. The queen stepped closer. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but it caused a visible reaction. A cluster of diplomats instinctively shifted backward. One of the armored emissaries, an imposing figure with metallic skin and narrow, glowing eyes, actually placed a hand over the hilt of a ceremonial blade before quickly reconsidering and lowering it. Daniel stayed where he was, mostly because his legs had stopped negotiating with him. "You spoke without intent to influence," the queen continued. "Without calculation, without audience." Daniel hesitated. Yeah. That's usually when people talk to themselves. Another ripple, this one sharper. The queen's eyes flickered, not physically, but in some deeper, harder-to-define way. "And what you said," she asked, "was it true?" There it was. The question that, for reasons Daniel couldn't explain, felt far more dangerous than anything else happening. He glanced briefly around the chamber. Every alien present was watching him, not just watching, studying, measuring, waiting. Like something important had just shifted, and no one quite understood how or why. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture no one else in the room seemed to recognize. Yeah, it was true. Silence deepened. I didn't mean it in a... He gestured vaguely, realizing too late that he had no idea how alien royalty interpreted compliments. Political way or strategic, you just look impressive, that's all. A faint, almost imperceptible change passed across her expression. Not quite a smile, but not absence of one either. The Telari delegate beside him made a strained sound. This is highly irregular. Yes, the Queen said softly, and the Telari fell completely silent. Her attention never left Daniel. For the first time since entering the chamber, Daniel became acutely aware of something else, something beneath the surface of the moment. It wasn't just that he had spoken out of turn. It was the way she was looking at him, not as a subordinate, not as a curiosity, but as though he had done something no one else here had managed to do. And that realization, more than anything else, made his pulse quicken, because Daniel Valen was just an assistant, an observer, a name buried 3 layers deep in the official delegation logs. He wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, standing there under the gaze of an alien queen who ruled half a star cluster, he had the unsettling, inescapable feeling that he suddenly did. No one spoke for several seconds after the Queen's final word, and in that silence, Daniel became acutely aware of just how loud his own breathing was. Then the chamber erupted. Not in chaos, nothing in this place ever truly lost control, but in a sudden surge of overlapping voices, layered in frequencies both audible and not. Translators struggled to keep up, rendering fragments into Daniel's ear implant. Unprecedented proximity. Emotional breach detected. Human irregularity confirmed. This cannot be allowed. Daniel winced slightly. Okay, that sounds bad. You have destabilized protocol, the Telari delegate whispered sharply beside him, their luminous veins flickering faster now. Do not speak further unless commanded. Great advice, Daniel muttered, then immediately pressed his lips together like he'd just sworn an oath of silence. The Queen did not raise her voice, yet the chamber obeyed her. Silence. It fell instantly, like a system command executed across every mind present. Her gaze shifted, not away from Daniel, but outward, encompassing the assembly without losing focus on him entirely. It was an unsettling duality, as if she could observe everything and still see him with absolute clarity. This human, she said, has demonstrated a phenomenon. That word landed heavily. Daniel blinked. I did. No one answered him. A tall figure stepped forward from the semicircle of delegates, one of the Virelian envoys. Their kind resembled humans more closely than most, though their eyes were elongated and entirely silver, reflecting light like polished mirrors. Their expression, if it could be called that, was carefully neutral. Your radiance, the Virelian said, voice smooth and controlled. With respect, a spontaneous verbalization does not constitute a phenomenon. It is a lapse. Then explain, the Queen replied, why I perceived no distortion. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Daniel frowned slightly. Distortion. The Telari leaned closer, lowering their voice. All speech in this court is measured, they murmured. Every word carries intent, political, emotional, strategic. Her kind perceives these layers. It is how she maintains balance among empires. Daniel's stomach tightened. And mine didn't have that. Yours, the Telari said, eyes fixed forward, was empty of calculation. Hey, Daniel whispered, mildly offended. I think nice things all the time. That is not what I mean. Before he could respond, another voice cut in sharper, edged with something less diplomatic. A species incapable of controlled intent is a liability, said a broad-shouldered delegate clad in segmented armor that seemed grown rather than forged. Their skin carried a faint metallic sheen, and narrow, glowing eyes fixed on Daniel with open suspicion. If humans cannot regulate emotional output, they cannot be trusted within high-order negotiations. Daniel tilted his head slightly. I feel like I'm being reviewed in real time. You are, the Telari said flatly. The Queen stepped forward again. The armored delegate immediately lowered their gaze. You mistake absence of calculation for absence of control, she said. They are not equivalent. Her attention returned fully to Daniel. Human, she said, what is your designation within your delegation? Daniel hesitated. Designation. Your role. Oh, right, he straightened slightly, suddenly aware that this might matter more than it ever had before. I'm an assistant. The word felt smaller the moment it left his mouth. A faint murmur spread again, this time tinged with something closer to disbelief. "Assistant," the Violian envoy repeated, their mirrored eyes narrowing slightly. "You assigned such an individual to this assembly." "That wasn't really a strategic decision," Daniel said quickly. "More like I was available." A few of the delegates shifted in ways that suggested confusion. Available, the concept didn't seem to translate well. The Queen, however, did not react with confusion. She studied him more intently now. "Your neural patterns," she said quietly, "are inconsistent with your designation." Daniel blinked. "I'm sorry, my what?" "You process observation differently," she continued, almost as if thinking aloud. "You do not filter through hierarchical significance. You do not prioritize based on power structures. You perceive." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. "That sounds like a compliment," he said carefully, "but also slightly concerning." A faint shift again, not quite a smile, touched the Queen's expression. "You observed me," she said, "not as a ruler, not as a variable within a political system, but as an individual." The chamber grew still again, because that, more than anything else, was unusual, perhaps even dangerous. The armored delegate stepped forward again, more insistent this time. "Your radiance, this is precisely the issue. Such perception disrupts established order. If one species begins to engage outside defined frameworks, then the frameworks may be incomplete," the Queen interrupted. That stopped them completely. Daniel felt a strange pressure in his chest, not fear, not exactly, something heavier, like the moment before a realization fully forms. He shifted slightly, glancing around. Every alien in the chamber was looking at him differently now, not just as a curiosity, as a variable, a problem, or something else. "I really feel like I should say something useful right now," Daniel muttered under his breath. "You should say nothing," the Telari whispered urgently. "Right, yes, nothing, good plan." The Queen took another step closer. Now there was barely any space between them. Up close, Daniel could see even more detail. The faint, flowing patterns beneath her skin, like slow-moving constellations, the subtle way the air seemed to respond to her presence, as if gravity itself bent slightly in acknowledgement. "You did not intend to influence me," she said. "No," Daniel replied. "You did not seek advantage. No, you did not fear consequence." Daniel paused. "I didn't think there would be one," he admitted. That earned him a reaction. Not from her, from the room. Several delegates shifted sharply. One of the smaller winged species let out a soft, involuntary sound. Even the Telari beside him seemed momentarily at a loss. Because that answer, simple, honest, unguarded, was not how anyone here operated, the Queen's gaze deepened, and for the first time something unmistakable appeared within it. Interest. "Fascinating," she said softly. And somehow that single word made the situation feel far more dangerous than before. The word lingered in the air like a trigger that had already been pulled. Fascinating. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then everything did. "This cannot proceed," the armored delegate said, stepping forward with a finality that cut through the chamber. "Your radiance, the implications are unacceptable. If this human's presence alters your perception, then he is no longer a neutral entity. He becomes influence." "Everything in this chamber is influence," the Queen replied calmly. "Not like this," the Violian added, their mirrored eyes now fixed sharply on Daniel. "Not without intent, not without control." Daniel raised a hand slightly. "Just to clarify, are we still talking about me, or did I accidentally become a philosophical problem?" No one answered him, which felt like an answer. The armored delegate's voice hardened. "Then we will resolve it. Remove the variable, restore equilibrium." That word, remove, landed differently. Daniel felt it in his chest before his mind fully caught up. "Oh," he said quietly, "that sounds less theoretical." Several of the chamber's automated constructs activated at once, their hovering forms shifting, light patterns tightening as if awaiting a command. A low hum built beneath the floor, subtle but unmistakable. The Telari beside him stiffened. "Do not move," they whispered. "Any sudden action may be interpreted as escalation." "I wasn't planning on doing anything sudden," Daniel murmured. "I was mostly planning on not being removed." The Queen did not move, but something about her presence changed. The soft, luminous patterns beneath her skin slowed, then aligned, like constellations snapping into a precise formation. The air grew heavier, not physically, but in a way that made every breath feel more deliberate. "You presume authority where none has been granted," she said. The armored delegate did not lower their gaze this time. Your judgment is compromised. That, more than anything, shifted the atmosphere. A direct challenge, not whispered, not implied. Spoken, the chamber reacted instantly. Several delegates recoiled. Others leaned forward, drawn by the tension. Even the constructs flickered uncertainly, as if awaiting clarification on which command hierarchy to follow. Daniel, standing exactly where he probably shouldn't be, glanced between them. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. "This feels like the part where things escalate dramatically." The Queen took one final step forward. Now she stood between Daniel and the assembly. Not by accident, the meaning of it was unmistakable, a shield, a choice. "You believe I am influenced," she said, her voice still calm, but now carrying something beneath it, something vast. "Then observe." Her gaze shifted, not to any one delegate, but across all of them. "You have stood before me for cycles uncounted," she continued. "You have spoken with precision, with calculation, with intent layered upon intent. A pause, and yet none of you have ever reached me. Silence, not imposed this time, earned. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest again, but now it wasn't fear, it was understanding. The Queen turned her head slightly, just enough that her voice reached him without breaking her address to the others. "He did not seek to influence," she said, "and yet he did." The Violian's voice came softer now, uncertain. "That is precisely why he is dangerous." "No," the Queen said, and for the first time there was something unmistakable in her tone. Emotion. "It is why he is necessary." That word hit harder than any accusation. Necessary. The chamber reacted, not with outrage this time, but something more complex. Unease, calculation, realization. The balance had shifted, not because of power, but because of something no one here had accounted for. The Queen turned fully now, facing Daniel. Up close, the intensity of her gaze should have been overwhelming, but it was not anymore. "You do not understand what you have done," she said. Daniel exhaled lightly. "That makes two of us." A faint, genuine smile touched her expression this time, brief but real. "You reminded me," she said. "That perception without intent is not weakness, it is clarity." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "We usually just call that being honest." A soft ripple moved through the chamber again. Different this time. Less hostile, more thoughtful. The Queen straightened, her presence expanding once more, not as pressure but as authority reclaimed. "From this moment," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the chamber, "the human known as Daniel Valen will serve as my direct liaison." The reaction was immediate: shock, disbelief, resistance. "That violates," the armored delegate began. "Centuries of protocol," the Queen finished. "Yes." She held their gaze. "And yet those centuries did not prevent the instability you now fear." No one argued after that, because they couldn't. Not without proving her point. Daniel blinked, once, twice. "I'm sorry," he said, raising a hand slightly. "I feel like I missed a step. Did I just get promoted?" The Teleri beside him let out a long, slow breath. "You have been elevated beyond comprehension." "Cool," Daniel said. "That sounds manageable." A few of the nearby delegates actually shifted, in a way that suggested something dangerously close to amusement. The tension, while still present, had changed shape. It was no longer about removing him. It was about understanding him, and that was far more complicated. The Queen extended her hand, not as a command, not as a symbol of dominance, but as something else entirely. An invitation. Daniel hesitated for half a second, then took it. Her touch was warm, unexpectedly so, and in that moment something subtle but profound passed between them. Not power, not control, recognition. The chamber watched in silence, because they all understood what had just happened. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough. A human, an overlooked, unremarkable assistant had stepped into the center of a system that had never accounted for him. And instead of breaking under its weight, he had changed it. Daniel glanced at her, then at the vast assembly, then back again. "So," he said quietly, "what happens now?" The Queen's eyes shimmered softly. "Now," she said, "we begin again." And for the first time since he had entered the chamber, Daniel didn't feel small. He felt seen. And somehow, across an empire that spanned stars, that was the most powerful thing of all.